And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. BC is abundant in natural resources, including clean and reliable renewable electricity. Approximately 95% of BC's electricity production is clean. However, electricity accounts for only 22% of the total energy we consume. Most energy consumed is sourced from fossil fuels. Let us rejoin the conversation as Barry Penner breaks down some of the numbers on BC's clean energy.
And it's that loss of 275 megawatts there, plus another 110 megawatts in Taylor, BC, where there's a natural gas processing plant. It'll still be there processing gas, reforming it when it comes out of the ground, but they won't be allowed to make electricity from the waste heat anymore, because that's a bad thing under Clean BC. So we'll lose that 110 megawatts, and we'll lose 275 on Vancouver Island. And so this U.S. agency has looked at this and said that means we're on track not to have that 15% buffer due to that, plus load growth that's happening in BC. So that's one thing. And then because I've been watching that, they then reported this summer that in the United States, despite all the new investments in wind and solar, which are significant, and as Stuart mentioned, in California many times in the afternoon now, they're producing a lot of electricity from rooftop solar. That's very expensive. It's one reason California residential rates for electricity are 4 times higher than what you pay here. Yes, 400% higher when you factor in the exchange rate. So those solar panels have to get paid for somehow. So yes, certain times of the day they're producing a lot of solar and wind, but this summer, the U.S. produced more electricity than ever from natural gas. So that's to Stuart's comment. Is it a transition or is it an addition? We've got more wind, we've got more solar, but we also have more natural gas electricity coming online because we just need more of all of it. All of the things in our economy are demanding more electricity, whether it's EVs or whether it's artificial intelligence or whether it's other new industries. They're consuming more and more electricity. And that's just the reality we're in.
Two numbers I want you to keep in mind when you leave here today under the Clean BC program. Using the government's numbers, they project the economy to contract by 21 billion. And they've broken it down to where they're going to reduce services. That's transportation, agriculture, natural gas. They've got it sector by sector on where they're going to reduce it. The other number I want you to remember is they're projected to reduce family incomes by 11,000 annually. That's your income. So when Stuart says energy is economy and vice versa, you're going to see the reality of that, not just in terms of the EV mandate, but also in terms of how it's going to affect you. If this BC plan comes to fruition, I think the first proof of this is going to when we see the mandate of electric cars being forced on you to buy or not. I think that's where we're probably going to see it.
Yeah, community benefit agreements. You guys definitely have heard about it. Community benefit agreements are a policy announced by the provincial government to basically force or build public projects with just 19 chosen unions. It doesn't leave it open for everybody to participate. CLAC members are not allowed to participate. Mary French's members wouldn't be allowed to participate building these projects. The end result on this one, it's totally unfair because we're all Canadians, British Columbians, they're all taxpayers. Everybody should be able to work on projects regardless of union affiliation. And number two, as taxpayers, it drives the cost up at a time for lots of different reasons, but it drives the cost up significantly on infrastructure. And so what I'm hearing you guys say and I really appreciate the presentation, but whatever direction we end up headed, we're going to need to build a lot of infrastructure, whether it's transmission lines or generation or you name it. There's going to be things that are going to need to be built. And so beyond BCIB, which is the BC Infrastructure Benefits, which is a Crown corporation that actually becomes the employer of the workforce, you've got the Allied Hydro Council, so BC Hydro builds projects. They've had a long-standing tradition of only using 20 unions. Again, increasing the cost of construction artificially before you even get started. And I guess this is sort of a question. It's also a little bit of a statement, but on top of that, you've got the federal government have just recently introduced the ITC, the investment tax credit, which is sort of a play on trying to funnel work to the building trades using collective agreements, building trade collective agreements as the labor conditions, the labor standards. And again, all of this is like huge overreach from government that's artificially driving costs of everything that we need, everything that we build, everything that we do. And I guess maybe my question is to you, Ellis. Should you get into Ottawa, how prepared are you to visit these issues and find solutions to make sure that, first of all, everybody can build these projects, number one, and specifically when it comes to the investment tax credit, because I don't think it's widely known that some of the nuances around this policy. But look very closely at that and consider repealing that as a policy overall. And then maybe I can just leave it for you guys to just riff on CBA's restrictive tendering and the labor force needed to build these major projects that we're going to need.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Proposed since the 1970s, when completed, Site C Dam will be the third dam on the Peace River. With a price tag of $16 billion, it is both the costliest dam in Canadian history and the most expensive publicly funded infrastructure project in BC history. Let us return to the conversation as Ellis Ross asks the panelists about BC's infrastructure.
This is a good lead-in for what was going to be my last question for these guys. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be all-encompassing in terms of where we're heading in terms of citizens of BC, in terms of taxpayers, in terms of ratepayers. And so my last question, and maybe we'll start with Stuart this time first. When we're talking about infrastructure costs going over budget, Site C going over budget, and all these extravagant plans, who's going to pay for all of it?
Yeah, well, check your cable bill. Oh, I'm just going to put TSN on. It's hockey season. Oh, the kid wants Disney. Okay. Pretty soon it's $200 a month, and you're saying, how did this happen? I wanted the basic. And inflating the cost of every component. It's horrifying how quickly it stacks up. Whether it's labor inputs or materials costs or transportation or fuel. Right now, pretty much there's a consensus across the country, provincially, and in the opposition, parts of the opposition in Ottawa, that consumer carbon prices are not politically sustainable. Even the government here in BC that was backing consumer carbon prices is saying, we can do without them because it's just part of this stack, this pancaking effect of cost, and to maybe look at a positive side, if you're talking about, okay, how do I move this project ahead? We have at our First Nation, we've got a great opportunity here. How can I match that with someone? There are some governments doing some good things. The Indigenous Investment Corporations in Alberta, the AIOC, just got its limit increased to $3 billion. It was 1, it went to 2, now it's at 3. They can operate in BC, so if you're looking for capital for a project, trying to escape this pressure of rising costs, I would suggest you think about options like that. I don't have a solution for the ITC, Ryan, but I do think if it can trigger major infrastructure into, say, emissions reduction projects that right now are challenging to do from conventional sources of financing. I hope there's not political poison pills built into that thing that are not insurmountable. You just look at how a government can become habituated to being in a deficit situation forever. No person can live like that forever. But now we are actually trajectorying, if that's a verb, into a permanent state of having provincial and federal deficits. It always collapses. It always ends. And the longer you wait to correct it, the worse it gets. And so the choices when it comes to a cleaner economy also depart, as does the ability to have freedom of choice in governments being able to make choices rather than just paying all that debt, paying those rising interest costs. And when the economy is growing, which it is right now, that's the last time you should be borrowing. You shouldn't be living on the credit card when the economy's humming. That's the doomsday signal, and we're seeing that right now, I'm afraid.
Ryan, you point out that these costs, these programs sound good, but embedded within it are policies that drive up the cost. So whether it's a lack of competition because of the bidding rules for public tenders, because you can only use certain organized labor pools to draw from, and you can't have others, that inherently drives up costs over time, and all of us pay for that. Either you pay directly through higher costs and taxes, or debt down the road, which is debt is deferred taxes. You'll pay it eventually, or you pay for it with inferior results, i.e. not as much will get finished for the given amount of money. You just won't be able to do as much because the price per unit is higher. And then, we in British Columbia, I mentioned we pay 1/4 the amount of electricity as they do in California. But where do you think our rates are going? Which direction do you think they're going? The government says, well, don't worry, we've passed legislation to cap how much rates will go up. But the last I checked, lenders don't really care about what the legislation says. We've borrowed $16 billion and counting for the Site C dam, which in my view will ultimately be a good long-term investment. But it has to get paid. And currently we have not been paying the interest on that $16 billion. It's not reflected in your rates for BC Hydro. That is coming after the election. As with all the bills that will be coming due for this forced, sped up electrification.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
The Site C Clean Energy Project is a hydroelectric dam and generating station on the Peace River, 7 kilometers southwest of Fort St. John. Located downstream of BC Hydro's 2 existing hydroelectric facilities, Site C will use water already stored behind the WAC Bennett Dam to produce 35% of the energy of the Bennett Dam, with a reservoir 5% of the size of the Williston Reservoir. Safety is a key consideration in the project design. Site C will be constructed and maintained in accordance with International and Canadian Dam Association safety practices. It meets current seismic, safety, and environmental guidelines.
Thank you for staying with us. Proposed since the 1970s, when completed, Site C Dam will be the 3rd dam on the Peace River. With a price tag of $16 billion, it is both the costliest dam in Canadian history and the most expensive publicly funded infrastructure project in BC history. Let us return to the conversation as Ellis Ross asks the panelists about BC's infrastructure.
One thing we didn't even touch on is the ban on natural gas for home heating, for new construction, not just residential but commercial. And that will be a blanket policy across British Columbia by 2030. Across British Columbia by 2030. It's already been adopted early by 14 municipalities, mostly in the Lower Mainland, Southern Vancouver Island, plus Whistler. But that'll be a blanket policy in BC by 2030. The amount of pressure that will put on the electrical grid and the cost to expand the grid to meet that peak demand during the coldest days of the year is almost unimaginable. A study that looked at just one community in Kelowna. If 50% of people switch from natural gas heating to electric heat pumps on the coldest day of the year, if only 50% made that switch, peak electrical demand would go up 100%. And that was modeling, I think, an average temperature of about minus 25 degrees Celsius. And when I first saw the study, I thought, well, does it really get that cold anymore? Guess what? In January, it got to minus 27 degrees in Kelowna for 3 days. So it was worse than what the model had predicted. And so the demand electrical system would be even greater. And that was if only 50% switched. And I don't want to dwell too much on the physics, but the ability of this electrical system to flex is not as great as the natural gas pipelines to flex, to push more molecules through. The ability to go 100% greater at peak in such a short period of time is just not there. So the amount of cost is unbelievable. And then where would the labor come from? Ryan, I met recently with leadership from the International IBEW, International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, from across Canada. And I thought that they would be positively inclined towards the BC government's electrification policy. And they're not. For two reasons. One, while you ban nuclear, that's crazy, because many of their members work in electrical plants quite safely and happily in Ontario and in New Brunswick. But secondly, they said, we don't have the members now. We're having a hard time recruiting enough people to get into this industry to do the work that we have now. The idea that we're somehow going to have this magical workforce show up that's trained and ready to go to put in all these EV chargers. In British Columbia, to hit the target by 2030, we'd have to put 15 a day, every single day between now and 2030, including Sundays. It's not happening. There are not the workers. So the IBEW are saying, we just don't understand who's coming up with these ideas, because it's not reflective of reality on the ground. But ultimately, to your question, who pays? We pay. The government can say in legislation we're going to keep rates artificially suppressed. Well, then who's paying that $16 billion and the interest? Well, you will. Not maybe through your electricity rates, but then through your taxes. Because one way or the other, the piper's going to get paid. It can be through your rates on electricity or be through your taxes. It's one or the other.
There was quite a bit of discussion about the power we import, right, for BC Hydro. Could you maybe just talk to like the current state of what we actually sell? Because I know it's a bit of an economic thing too, right? Where a hydro dam, you can turn it up, you can turn it down with a switch, right? So we've used that potential in BC to sell power at, higher rates, buy it at lower rates. And so 2022 numbers were something like, I think it was we were selling about $1 billion worth and buying about $500 million worth. Is that still the same currently, or have you seen that change? Is it, to me, like that's kind of that's why we do that, right? Like that's why we buy it. We buy it for less, sell it for more, and that helps ratepayers, right? And just one more super quick thing. I can promise this will be quick. I'm a proud new owner of a Ford Lightning, so totally love the technology. We bought a Kia Soul in 2019. The infrastructure was not there that great in 2019. Much improved now. But where I wanted to go with that is, I'm sure it does affect the GDP, but I can tell you how it affects people's pocketbooks is another part of the conversation. And like my example would be, I bought the truck in Duncan on Vancouver Island, drove it home here. I can tell you the ferry cost twice as much than the electricity did for the trip the rest of the way from Vancouver, about $120 compared to 62. So it's a pocketbook issue, I think, for people and how much money they keep in their jeans as opposed to, the GDP. Because it's not like we all split a share of the GDP, like, take the total, divide it by the population, hand out the money. I'm wondering where we're at, in your opinion, on like the sale versus purchase with BC Hydro. Thanks.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Community benefit agreements are legally binding contractual agreements negotiated between public or private institutions and contractors, unions, and community representatives working on larger public works projects. In this final segment of Open Connection, Barry shares how British Columbia's CBAs negatively impact some organizations.
Okay, there's a couple of different things there. I'll try to hit them really fast. My understanding is that on the community benefits agreements, it is only certain unions that are allowed, companies with certain union affiliations. Others, like CLAC, are excluded from those projects. I'll let Ryan answer that. But that's my understanding. Number two, on import-export, the numbers I was quoting are net. So that's when you subtract our exports and figure out the imports. In the last 2 years, we've been a massive importer. It's a record amount. We've never imported net as great as we have now. So as I mentioned, according to BC Hydro's most recent annual report, about 24.5% of our needs. That doesn't mean that there are certain hours of the day that we export, but on balance, we've been importing more than we've been exporting in the last 2 years. And a large part of that is the drought, but it's also because we haven't been building enough to keep up with our demands. The current government canceled the standing offer program. First thing they did when they got elected, we said we don't need this electricity. Same thing they said about Site C Dam at the time. That's been proven to be incorrect. So the standing offer program had a fixed price. If you could build a wind power project, run a river, recover methane from a landfill, then you could do it and you'd get a certain guaranteed price. But that was stopped, and so we have fallen behind. And that's why we're now having to try and catch up. And the government's called for power, which they should. The BC Hydro's called for more proposals, but we're now behind the curve. And so we're playing catch up. And your last comment was on EVs. Yes, part of the story and the big selling point has been you don't have to go to the pump as much anymore, or at all, depending on what you're driving. Individuals will have to do the calculation about when their payback period is, when will they recover the extra amount. I suspect your Ford Lightning wasn't that cheap. The federal government, I think, offers a $5,000 discount, which is at point of sale. They flow that through, but so that's taxpayers subsidizing the price. The BC government has another program through called Clean BC, up to $4,000, but there's an asterisk. Your vehicle would no longer qualify for that because they've cut it off at $50,000. So if the vehicle exceeds $50,000 in value, it's no longer eligible for any provincial government financial support. And there aren't very many EV vehicles that sell for under $50,000. There are some, but not many. So you have to sharpen your pencil. But again, for the average British Columbian, they tend to look at what's my monthly payment, because most people finance a car. Most don't have the money in the bank. They have to borrow or lease. So they look at what's my monthly payment, and then how does that fit with my budget, and is it cheaper to buy an EV on that monthly payment versus a non-EV? And maybe some people will think about their fuel costs. Others may think about their maintenance costs. One of the sales pitches for EVs is hopefully maintenance is cheaper over time. You don't have to replace the brakes as much. You don't have to do oil changes. But then people worry about, well, what happens if the battery fails and the cost of replacing that? So there's all these other factors that people have to take into consideration. I guess the comment I was making, I love the technology, but I'm not going to sit here today and say you must buy an EV. And if you don't, I'm going to fine you $20,000. I don't think that's the way to deal with people. And that kind of a mandate creates the backlash that we're seeing, and it politicizes things. So in the U.S. election, we have one candidate that's completely opposed to EVs, and yet ironically is supported by Elon Musk. So go figure out human nature. But welcome to life. It's complicated.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.